السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Since Alhamdulillah, we talked briefly in general about different matters of worship, mainly the Salah, and we talked about the Zakah. So we'll talk inshallah ta'ala about the two other pillars of Al-Islam besides Al-Tawheed and the Shahadatain, which is As-Siyam and then Hajj. This will be also brief inshallah ta'ala, since we're talking about it in general without following a specific book. So we'll talk inshallah ta'ala today, or we'll start talking about the ahkam, or the rulings of fasting. And the rulings of As-Siyam, or fasting, definitely it's important to be mentioned before Ramadan, because Ramadan is the month where it's an obligation upon every Muslim able to fast. But it's always, at all times, it's something that we need to learn. And there's the option acts of worship when it comes to matter of optional fasting, and also mandatory fasting other than the month of Ramadan, like matters of kafarat or expiations, or making up the days missed in Ramadan, and other things that we need to be always reviewing and knowing these ahkam of fasting. So fasting, as we know, the word as-siyam or as-sawm is to abstain from what breaks that state of being fasting. And this is one of the pillars of Islam, is to fast the month of Ramadan. And the virtues of fasting and the importance of it and the wisdom behind it and all of this is definitely something important for the Muslim to learn, because there are texts, there is revelation from Allah that talks about these things in specific. But in the subject of fiqh, we're more concerned about how to establish this act of worship, and what's the rulings of it, what's the pillars of it, what's the conditions of it, and how to do it in the right way, without ignoring what should be in our hearts and the effect of the ibadah in our hearts, and to attain the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. We who believe, fasting has been ordained upon you the way that it has been ordained on the nations before you, so that you become among the muttaqeen, those who fear Allah, those who purify themselves from disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as-sawm, or fasting, is to withhold yourself, is to abstain from eating and drinking, and what breaks the fast, from Fajr all the way to sunset, with the intention of fasting, seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. So it's a specific imsak, it's a specific abstaining from food and drink and what breaks the fast, with the intention that it's done as an act of worship, which is a sawm, or fasting, seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. We know that the month of Ramadan is an obligation. We know that there are also optional acts of worship when it comes to fasting. So the fasting of the month of Ramadan is a pillar of Islam. It's mandatory, and the virtues of the month are so many. And with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, we're not going to mention that in details in these sessions, inshallah ta'ala. When we get to the ahkam, to the ruling right away, also briefly, when it comes to the month of Ramadan, and we'll review that inshallah ta'ala also before the month of Ramadan, again, is the month of Ramadan becomes mandatory for people to fast when the hilal, when the moon of Ramadan is seen by one Muslim, just physically fit, that is able to see things, whether it's a man or a woman. The witness of both or either is valid. Only one person will be sufficient for the entire ummah to fast the month of Ramadan, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, صُومُوا لِرُؤْيَتِهِ وَأَفْطِرُوا لِرُؤْيَتِهِ. That fast when you see it, and break your fast when you see it. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for the ummah to observe this great act of worship with ease, without difficulty, without going out of one's ways. And again, this is a subject that is become a sad situation for many of the Muslims every year. It's an easy matter, And so this is from the fiqh perspective, and this is the majority of the ulama are upon that opinion. So either that, the month of Ramadan, either to enter by seeing the hilal, or by Sha'ban being 30 days, because the month cannot be more than 30 days. And there are many rulings with regards to the, witnessing the moon and things like this. When we talk about the pillars of fasting, the pillars of fasting are two things only. The first one is the niyyah, the intention, and the second one is to abstain from what breaks the fast. These are the two pillars of fasting. Then the intention is that this is done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to seek rewards from Allah. But from the fiqh perspective, the niyyah that this is fasting. When a person stay away from eating and drinking, a person might do it out of being in a diet, or he doesn't feel like eating, or many other reasons. But this is as an act of worship, seeking rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. The intention for fasting for the month of Ramadan, for the obligatory fast, it's best to be away from the differences of opinions, is to be done for every day, to have the intention during the night that the person would fast the next day. And this intention is in the heart. So there's no need to say anything. There's no need to focus so much in one's conscious and to say that I'm going to fast tomorrow. There's no such a thing. It's just the fact that if a person in the days of Ramadan and during the night, he knows that the next day he will fast. So this is what is meant by the intentions to be at night. And always this example to show the significance of why, or the wisdom behind having the intention during the night. It comes up in the situation when a person sleeps before Fajr, for example, and he wakes up after Maghrib. If someone sleeps before Fajr and wakes up after Maghrib, that means if he sleeps before Maghrib. So I take that back, inshallah. If someone sleeps before Maghrib and he wakes up after Fajr, that means the entire night he's been sleeping. This is where the issue, does it mandatory for him to have the intention during the night, comes in place. For those who said he has to have intentions during the night, he had missed it. So in Ramadan, he still have to face the day if he's able to do so. And according to that opinion, he has to make up that day again, because there was no chance during the night for him to at least have that intention that he's fasting the next day. For the nafil fasting, if a person is fasting Mondays and Thursdays, 3 days of the month or whatever, then this niyyah can be during the day in the morning, all the way to Salatul Dhuhr, because it's still before half of the day passed. But the person would not get the reward of fasting till he initiate his niyyah, his intentions. So as long as he didn't eat anything after Fajr, he can initiate his niyyah anytime, but the reward starts once the niyyah in place, and a person would then continue the rest of the day. There are also some other issues with fasting that when it comes to as always, when we talk about the rulings of any act of ibadah, there are conditions and there are pillars for it. And the conditions, we always talk about the conditions of wujub and the conditions of as-sihha, meaning what the conditions, if it's present in a person, then it's mandatory for him to fast. And what are the conditions that makes the fasting valid for the person, and he does not have to make up the fasting again. These are two types of conditions that the ulama, they mention in many different acts of ibadah. Shurutul wujub, meaning that if these conditions are fulfilled, then, or it's present, it's mandatory for the person to fast, meaning the month of Ramadan or the obligatory fast. These conditions are al-Islam, for a Muslim, al-Aql, someone has sanity, is not insane, and al-Bulugh, to reach the age of puberty. That makes it mandatory, right? That makes it mandatory. And number 4, the ability to fast. If a person has the ability to fast, then it's mandatory upon him. If he doesn't, then it's not mandatory upon him. The 5th one is that he's not a traveler. That means he's a resident in his place. So these are 5 conditions for fasting to be an obligation upon the person. Again, al-Islam, for a Muslim, al-Aql, to have intellect, that means he's not insane. And al-bulugh, which is reaching the age of maturity or puberty. Number 4, the ability to fast. And number 5, being resident in a place and not a traveler. This is the wujub. This is what makes it mandatory. There are conditions for the validity of fasting. صحة الصيام. You would find that there are conditions similar. So if you wrote down these 5 conditions for what makes siyam mandatory, there are also 5 conditions for the fasting to be valid. The first one is like the first one in the previous one, which is al-Islam. So al-Islam is a condition for the validity of fasting. So if a disbeliever, for example, he fasted to share with the Muslims, for example, what they do, the fasting is not valid for him, of course. If someone comes and he says, I want to fast with you, we should not tell him, go away, stay away from us, but rather this can be a great da'wah for him. But we explain to him that why you're fasting or why we fast is not because we're trying to be healthy, right? Or to feel for the poor and all of these types of things. This can be wisdom behind what the obligation is. But we fast because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that is worthy of worship, he's the one that commanded us to fast. So al-Islam is a condition of the sihha or the validity of fasting. Also al-aql is another condition, the same thing, because the majnoon, if someone is insane, his fasting is not valid and there's no obligation upon him. The amal or the action, he's been excused not to do anything. And these are the 2 common ones between the 2 different levels of conditions. But what's different in the conditions of validity of fasting is, for example, tamiz. Tamiz is in place of puberty. A tamiz is for the child to reach the age where he's able to understand. 7 years old is usually the norm of this, where a child will pray, even though it's not mandatory for him, that it's mandatory upon his parents to make him pray when he's 7 years old and above, and he get rewards for it. And his salah is valid. His salah is valid and he gets reward for it, and his family gets reward for it. And the same thing for fasting. You know, if a child fasts, his fast is valid. It's a valid fasting. He gets rewards for it. For those who help him, they get rewards for it. But it's not mandatory upon him. It's not mandatory upon him. That's why he is not to be punished, for example, if he breaks his fast. So a tamiz is a condition for validity of fasting. So it's valid if a child fasts. And the 5th one or the 4th one is to have the intention from the night. Right? So the intention has to be during the night and before Fajr. And another condition, which is also a 5th one, is there's no blood of menses or afterbirth bleeding. This is for the validity of fasting. Otherwise, the fasting is not valid. So these 5 conditions for sihhat al-sawm or the validity of fasting, again, if you want to write them down, al-Islam and al-aql. Both are mentioned before. Islam and al-aql, to have sanity. Number 3, at-tamiz, instead of puberty, at-tamiz, which is to be able to differentiate between what is right and what is wrong, and it's usually 7 years old. And number 4, the niyyah, the intention from the night. And number 5, there's no blood of menses and so on. So these are the 5 conditions of the validity of fasting versus the 5 conditions of what makes fasting mandatory. As we said, the pillars of fasting are the intention and to abstain from what breaks the fast. And what breaks the fast is basically eating and drinking during the day. If we're talking about the obligation, then it's haram, of course. So anything that goes through the mouth down into one's stomach, right, it breaks the fast. It breaks the fast. And the second thing, al-jima', when a person has relations with his wife, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, the blood of menses and afterbirth bleeding from the woman, this, of course, invalidates the fasting. And she has to make up the days and, these days that she would have during the month. So this breaks the fast, even if it's before Maghrib by 5 minutes, by 2 minutes. that day has to be made up. Of course, the rewards is preserved, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. But as far as the validity of fasting, it has to be made up again. Also, the ulama, they mention when it comes to what breaks the fast is to intentionally throw up. To intentionally throw up something. And why would a person do that? Because of a valid reason. Maybe there's something in one's stomach that he needs to get it out. If that is done intentionally, it's to be made up again. And there are some things that might have differences of opinions. And also one of which is to break one's intentions. If someone during the day, he intended to eat, that's it. And then afterwards he changed his mind, that breaks the fasting of that day. If it's a mandatory fasting. If it's an optional fasting, if it's before Dhuhr, it's okay. But when he decides to eat, for example, and then he changes his mind and he did not eat anything since Fajr, the problem is that the rewards decreases, because then the reward start being or counted after he gets the intention, or after having the intention of fasting. So these are basically things that breaks the fast. If a person eats and drinks forgetfully, that doesn't break the fast. If a person did not know some of these rulings, it doesn't break the fast. Right? The things that is not intentional for the person, right, that does not break the fast. And there are things that it's the category of what excuses the person has to break his fast. Basically being sick, a traveler, as we said, the woman in her menses or after bleeding. If a person is very old, and being very old, it doesn't have to be with sickness. Just the fact that the person is very old and is very weak, that's a valid reason for the person not to fast. And of course, there is ways to make up for this in the case of the old person or the one that has a permanent sickness that is prevent him from fasting, is to feed a poor for every day, as it will come, inshallah ta'ala. A pregnant woman or someone that is breastfeeding her child, this is by itself is a valid reason for her to break the fast and to make up the days and to be away from the differences of opinions, to feed a person for every day if a year passes and she didn't make up these days. And the one that feeds is basically the guardian of the child if she broke her fast out of the fear for the child. So the one that really it's mandatory upon him to pay or to feed the poor is not the woman herself, but is the guardian of the child, because she broke her fast, not for herself, but for the health and the good being of the child. If she broke her fast because of her own health, then she's the one to do it, or if someone else do it, then that's fine. And even some things, other things that are mentioned in this, like, for example, if someone had to break his fast to save someone's life, right? This is a valid reason, of course. If there is such a thing, like, for example, someone is drowning, and the only way for a person to help him to go into the sea and get him out, he has to have he's very weak, he's feeling very weak, and he needs to save that person from drowning, even though it's an instant thing. A person would not sit and eat first before he do this, but this is something that can be valid for a person to break his fast. To save someone's life or so. The details of these types of rulings, right, is valid, of course, for us to learn. And when we talk about these ahkam or these rulings in general, is for example, if a person, his condition changed during the day, and this is in Ramadan, then he should abstain from eating and drinking till Maghrib time because of the importance of the days of Ramadan, and then he has to make up the day. Say, for example, someone that is insane and he regained again his sanity during the days of Ramadan, then he should abstain from eating and drinking till sunset. Or a disbeliever became a Muslim, right? Then he should stay during the day of Ramadan. If he's able to, then he should stay away from eating and drinking till Maghrib time. If someone was traveling and he was not fasting and he returned home before Maghrib in Ramadan, right? He's already not fasting and he has to make up the day, but out of the respect of the month, and now he's resident. So he should abstain from eating and drinking till Maghrib, and he has to make up the day. So if someone overslept the first night of Ramadan and he didn't know that the next day is Ramadan, right? And if he didn't eat anything, then he complete the fast, and inshallah he doesn't have to make up the day. But if he ate something in the morning and then they declared that today is the first day of Ramadan and he didn't know, then he should abstain from eating and drinking, and he has to make up the day. And there's no sin, of course, on him. The one that breaks his fast because of old age, as we said, or sickness that there's no means of cure as far as the human beings they know, then he does not have to make up the days, of course, because he's not able to, but to feed for every day a poor person, and that will be sufficient for him. So either to feed 30 poor person and he fix food for them and they eat, or for each day, like half of a sa', which is like a kilogram of food that can be given to the poor. And he can do it in the beginning or the middle or the end, and it's best to do it in the beginning if he knows that he's not going to complete the month. Fasting while traveling, it's option for the person traveler. And if it makes it easy for the traveling, then it's from the sunnah to break the fast in this case and to make up the day. But sometimes in traveling, it's easier for the person to fast because, say, for example, everybody's fasting. So it's easier than to make up the day afterwards. So this is, with regards to fasting, and there are many other rulings with those who are fasting. Some of the places where the sun does not set, in the polar areas or so, how would they break their fast then when it's days for 6 months or for 4 months or whatever, is to basically to make an analogy of what's the closest country to them, the closest place to them that the sun sets, then they should follow them. Some people think that they should follow Mecca. No, they should follow the closest place to them that has days and nights clearly. So then they should follow that. But for those who have sunrise and sunset, even if it's, say, for example, 20 hours of fasting, then they should fast. They have to fast, right? And they should not say, well, that's too long. Well, that's how they chose, or for the most part, many people, they choose to be in these places. So, they still have to fast. Unless a person is not able to, that's a different situation. Some things that not necessarily breaks the fast as long as it doesn't go into one's insides and it's not intentional, whether it's to put kuhl or to take a shot or to use henna or airdrops and things like this. It's in the month of Ramadan, it's better to avoid things if a person is able to, but if a person has to, there's no harm, even though even also hijama and the like of this. The toothpaste, these things by itself does not break the fast, but it's the strong taste to things can be avoided, and it's better to avoid it so that a person doesn't find the taste of it in one's throat and as if it's something going inside the person. I'm trying to think of other things that is, it's for the person fasting, you should stay away from intimacy and the like of that with one's wife and things like this. And what breaks the fast is known when it comes to this. Making up the days of Ramadan, it's something that is mandatory, of course, for those who are able to do so, and they should do it as fast as they can, as soon as they can, so that it's the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon them. And if there is a valid reason for that person to delay it, sure, but as long as it's done before the next Ramadan comes in, so that the person would take care of that. And if a person is not able to, then to feed a person for every day, or a poor person for every day. The sunan and the mustahabbat are so many, but we'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. And next time we'll talk about the recommended acts and the recommended fasting, something that we should try our best to do, inshallah ta'ala. So I'll stop here. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.